Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our annual online broadcast webinars at Fuel Arts, Art Tech, and NFT series. Throughout the recent months, we see how major strategists among the sophisticated investors have been deploying money in Web3, like Samsung and LG invested in Yuga Labs and the Sandbox, respectively. The management company of Google, Alphabet, invested in Dapper Labs, while Chinese tech giant Tencent, who is known for Epic Games and Discord, invested in Immutable. So PayPal also invested in Layer Zero, which also attracted the attention of the newborn Christie's Ventures fund. And recently we heard news that Animoca Brands, the first strategist from the gamify area in art and tech, they announced the launch of its ecosystem of 140 startups, which will include production, finance, and analytics, for instance. So what defines a strategist? Let's say only a strategic thinking. Well, that's the first that comes to our mind, though we at Fuel Arts believe that the real strategist is not about thinking holistically, taking care of the money entrusted by investors, or desiring to stay up to date in the latest trends. But the strategist is also about taking care of our future, which is, as we know, not always predictable, but always promising. Otherwise, why go into it together? So in our today's webinar, we'll talk to another tech market strategist who recently entered the Web3 game, the Galaxy Labs. And we're glad to present our today's main guest, Mohnish Mehta, the head of finance and operations at Galaxy Labs. Mohnish is primarily responsible for building and maintaining the financial operation infrastructure needed for Galaxy Labs, and as well as its portfolio companies to function efficiently. And also, Mohnish oversees all Web3 initiatives of Galaxy Lab. So, hi, Mohnish. Thank you.
Hi, Dennis. Such a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me. I'm very excited for this conversation. I think ever since we connected at Christie's, I was fascinated by what you're doing at Fuel Arts, and excited to contribute to the work that you're doing for the Web3 ecosystem and the NFT and art ecosystem overall. So thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Likewise. Thank you. And yes, as always, my charming co-host, the project manager of Fuel Arts, Sonia Stubble-Byen.
Hi, everyone. Happy to be here.
Hi, Sonia. So the first question, we've studied the portfolio of Galaxy Labs, and yes, indeed, we were first met at Christie's Arts and Tech Summit, which, the slogan of this summit might have been connecting people, Christie's connecting people. So we paid attention to what you've been doing as the head of finance operations at Galaxy Labs. So our first question is about the positioning. So Galaxy Labs positions itself as a startup studio that, a quotation, launches moonshot initiatives to build a more kind and equal society. So Mohnish, how would you describe Galaxy Labs? Is it an investment firm, an accelerator, an incubator, or a VC company builder?
Yeah, I think the easiest way to understand what Galaxy Labs does is to think of it as an incubator, right? We're built out of a family office, and we have a lot of leeway in terms of how we run and start companies operationally. A lot of startup studios have certain KPIs and certain metrics they need to hit in terms of profitability, in terms of revenue. Galaxy Labs is different in that a lot of our work is impact focused. A lot of things that we do, our primary KPI is something like poverty alleviation or access to certain tools or technology amongst underrepresented populations within our country and within this world, right? So we're an impact-driven incubator. We look at opportunities that arise or like challenges that arise in our society and in the world. And then essentially what we do, what our process looks like is We identify the challenge, we put together a team, we ideate a solution, and then we go forth and execute against that challenge, right? So we're always fighting against something, or we're trying to improve something. And that's the core ethos of what we do.
Sounds great. And as we were reading with Dennis together, your company has raised more than like $300 million to deploy in different startups. And you were just saying that they're all in different sectors. How would you describe overall the investment strategy? And also, what role does social responsibility play when you actually make decisions?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think I alluded to this in my previous response, but I think social responsibility plays a key role in every single thing that we do. It's one of the most important metrics that we focus on when we're investing in a startup or an idea. Yes, we raised $300 million, and we have companies that are span across many verticals. But if you look at the highest level of our core focus areas, they primarily can be divided into three things, right? So the primary of which is democracy building. The second is criminal justice reform, and the third is healing humanity, right? So those are the three highest level of verticals within which we operate. A lot of that money has been deployed in nonprofit organizations, in PACs, and more recently into for-profit organizations that are driven towards impact goals. But all three of those are just essentially different vehicles through which we can achieve the same goal, right? So sometimes you need policy change, you need the government involved, and you need structural change. In that sense, you're going to work with a PAC or a C4 organization. Sometimes you just need to invest in something that cannot be done through a lens of profit, and then we'll go through a C3 lens or a non-profit lens. And sometimes you can make profit and generate actually a sustainable company which funds itself and is doing something good forever. And in that lens, we'll go for an LLC or a for-profit lens, essentially.
Thank you, Mohnish. We're happy to admit that Galaxy Labs started its Web3 expansion with investment in a startup from our tech and NFT ecosystem, namely Maloka, the VR mobile meditation platform, which helps people building and maintaining a practice via gamification. So could you elaborate a bit more about the story behind this investment?
Yeah, I think so. How I mentioned, essentially, we have three primary verticals that we focus on, right? Being democracy building, criminal justice reform, and healing. Healing is actually the third vertical, and it's the most recent vertical within which we've decided to invest in as a studio and as a family office and as a company. And our journey in that particular vertical started very recently, right? So when the pandemic hit, we realized that not only are people dealing with challenges when it comes to physical health, but things like isolation, things like quarantine were making the mental health pandemic or the mental health epidemic even worse, right? If you look at statistics and data, which shows the number of people that are dealing with mental health or mental struggles in the past decade or two decades, it's a chart that goes straight up, right? And it's only gotten worse since the pandemic hit. So it really became a core focus area for us, and we really wanted to do something as a company and as an organization to combat this epidemic. So we were looking for opportunities, and then essentially, fast forward, I think halfway into the pandemic, our CEO was actually in a room with two brilliant entrepreneurs or two brilliant people from the mindfulness space, and he actually introduced them to VR technology for the first time. Obviously, VR technology is still relatively new, and even Oculus headsets, they're not the most it's a clunky experience. It's not ready for mass market adoption, but it's new and it has a lot of potential. And essentially, our CEO introduced them to this new technology, and one of their first reactions was the way that the VR headset can allow you to disconnect your mind from your body and to really feel present in the moment. They felt like they'd never seen anything like that, and they really saw great potential for the technology to bring mindfulness and to bring meditation to the next generation of humans, right? And fast forward a few months after that, we had them in the studio, we were ideating things with them, and then that's how Maloka was born, essentially.
That's very interesting. And what other investments do you actually have in the same direction, in the direction of healing?
Yeah, so we're looking at a few grants. So, like, for example, we're working with a couple of organizations in the country which have in-person healing retreats. So these are retreats that do all sort of things from Reiki to sound meditations to breath work, and a variety of different mindfulness experiences. So we're also investing in the real world, so to speak. And when you think about the metaverse, it's like, okay, that's the digital world, and there's the metaverse, and there's the real world. So we're investing in both those spaces.
Very cool. And if we're coming back to Maloka, like, what were the key milestones for the company, and like, what do we know more where the company is actually heading in the future?
Yeah, so I think in terms of milestones, I think the biggest milestone for us was definitely December of last year, which was when we launched on the Oculus Store. So we're a fairly new title. We've only been, right now it's about August. So, we've been in market for about 8 months, 9 months. So we're a fairly new company, and just being able to be in the market and have real users using the game and giving us feedback, that was probably the biggest milestone that we've reached. But if you think about the topic of today's conversation and our presence in Web3 and NFTs, the first thing that we did actually in the Web3 space was a manifesto for mindfulness in Web3. Essentially, it was a thought leadership piece. It was an open letter that us and our founders put out to the world, essentially letting them know our vision for a mindful Web3. And you guys can check it out at mindfulmetaverse.co, and you can read the entire open letter. But essentially, what we did was every single person who signed the manifesto, you could sign using your wallet, your crypto wallet, and every single person who signed the manifesto was invited to mint a free NFT to commemorate their participation in this movement about a month from launch, right? And we were very grateful to have amazing people like Paris Hilton, Deepak Chopra, Sharon Salzberg, Keith Grossman, Mike Novogratz, just a few to name from the list of people who signed the manifesto and showed their support. Overall, we had about like 30,000 signatures, and it's something we're really proud of. And then, I'm sorry, so the first part of the question was kind of our milestones, and then kind of where we're headed.
One is about the future.
Yeah, so I think, when you talk about the future, I think one of the things that we are really focused on right now is how we can take a game and convert it into a metaverse, right? Like, a metaverse in its ethos is a social platform. It connects people. It allows people to be in the same space. But if you experience Maloka right now, it's a single player game. You can't interact with your friends. You can't have your friends on the same island as you. You can't have conversations with them. You can't necessarily have a class where like someone like a practitioner could like bring people in and actually guide them through an experience. But that's kind of what we're working towards. There's a lot of technological challenges to make that happen. When you talk about co-presence, it requires way more bandwidth and a way more streamlined backend to be able to handle that sort of data load. So that's something we're kind of experimenting with, but it's definitely, I think, the biggest thing that we're working towards for the next year.
Thank you. Thank you, Mohnish. Let's take VR a bit wider as a trend. As we all remember, VR became mainstream mainly during the pandemic, when the art world understood that it has to showcase whatever he wants to represent, to sell, or to buy. So, and if you look at the numbers, only direct investments in VR startups, startups developing VR technology, where they exceeded 7.5 million in 2020, the beginning of 2021. But if we look at the acquisitions, mergers and acquisitions, a lot of strategists, they bought out the technologies, they bought out the whole team, and the cumulative value of that acquisitions exceeded 40 million in 2020, let's say first half of 2021. After that, NFT became the mainstream. And now we see a slow decline in investments in VR only companies. So, in your opinion, what needs to be done to make VR mainstream adoption?
Yeah.
And
Oh, sorry.
the second question would be, let's say, what steps does Galaxy Lab take in this direction?
Yeah, so I think, it's interesting you mentioned the numbers about how much money is being invested into VR startups in the present year or in the present moment, right? Obviously, I think a lot of that is skewed by the fact that investments are now happening within the organizations, right? So the time of the M&A has passed, right? So the acquisitions of like Facebook acquiring Oculus, for example, and Google acquiring another headset company, like that all was happening back in 2020. But if you look at all of the major tech companies right now, they have carved out massive budgets to invest within their own VR and metaverse platforms, right? If you even look at Apple, for example, Apple, publicly says very little about this, but they've been investing in their own headset for about 5 years now already. And they're going to continue to do so. Apple's a company that doesn't really release a product until it's ready for mass market adoption, right? So we're not going to see necessarily the numbers that we used to see in the past couple of years publicly being put out there in terms of like acquisitions or mergers, because it's not how the money's being invested, right? But I would say there's probably 3 or 4 times or 5 times, even 10 times as much money being invested in these years than there probably was, right? And Meta actually talks about that. It's one of the only companies that talks about it publicly in terms of how much they're investing in those headsets. To answer your question specifically, if you look at what the challenges are, I think primarily most of the challenges are hardware related, right? Like, I don't know if I'm sure you guys have tried an Oculus headset, but it's a very clunky piece of hardware. It's heavy. It blocks off your entire vision. It's VR only. There's a lot of problems with it. Like, even when you end up like creating, a Guardian, and like when you're creating your environment to experience it within, there's a lot of restrictions in terms of how you can experience it. I think when we're talking about mass market adoption, we need to reach a point when, number one, we're not just being constrained by VR, right? It needs to be a device that can seamlessly toggle between the real world and the virtual world. So it needs to be a combination of VR, AR, and XR being put into one device, right? Essentially, what I'm describing is a pair of glasses that you can put on that are not heavy, that are not clunky, that are easy to handle and easy to use, right? So that's kind of the future that we're working towards. What is the biggest constraint? I think there's a couple of things, right? Battery power is definitely one of them. Like, if you want to have a tiny device that can operating at such high levels of data and bandwidth for 12 hours, you need amazing battery technology. And then all of the technology that's already in the headset, it needs to be made much smaller, right? It needs to be able to essentially fit into a glass. So that's kind of the technological challenges that we're looking at. In terms of what we at Galaxy Labs are doing to combat this, I mean, frankly speaking, the problem that I described, there's companies bigger than us that are handling it, right? I mentioned Apple, I mentioned Facebook, I mentioned Google. Like, the tech giants are really tackling this problem. What our contribution to the ecosystem is to be ready, right? When this technology is ready for mass market adoption, and when all of these companies have created devices that everyone's using, we want to be ready so that people can actually experience the world through a combination of virtual reality, augmented reality, and the real world, right? And that's the platform we're creating right now, specifically within Mindfulness. We've brought together the best content creators, the best mindfulness experts, and we've already got them used to VR technology, and we've got them used to creating content within this platform, right? So when the mass market adoption is there, people can actually experience something that makes sense, that they can enjoy, right? So that's our contribution to the ecosystem.
Sounds great. Dennis?
Yep.
Yeah, I just said thank you. That's an exceptional reply. I mean, exceptional, very inspiring.
Yeah, I mean, the future is looking bright. I'm one of the things I pride myself on is being an optimist, and I like to look at things with a positive light. And I think there's a lot of good people in the space who are doing a lot of good work. So I think they deserve to be recognized for what they're doing.
Absolutely agree. And I actually want to come back to like art tech and NFT. And I want to know what are the other initiatives Galaxy Labs is actually working on in this sector?
Yeah, it's something we've started exploring more and more. I think, the fact that we're built out of family office that's heavily focused on Web3 and on crypto technologies, it obviously makes it much more, gives us much more incentives to look at the space in a positive light and look at it and see how we can leverage the forces to be. I think we don't necessarily have any active projects in the space right now, but we're exploring at least two projects right now that we may or may not launch. What I can tell you about them is that they're all community focused, right? So one of the things that I'm very bullish on when it comes to NFTs is the ability to build community around, essentially the way I like to think about it is a membership pass, right? The reason art gets pulled into it is because a good artist can create something that a particular set of people can empathize with, right? And if you think about really truly powerful community building online, you need to bring together people who think about things the same way, right? Like they don't have to be the same people, but they need to think about one particular thing in the same manner. And I think the artist can really capture, if the artist can really capture that ethos and try to bring those people together in a sense that in a community sense that ties them together, I think that's really powerful. So that's all to say that we're basically looking at community use cases within two specific industries. Those two specifically being psychedelics and sports. That's kind of all I can share right now, but those are the two industries that we're looking at in terms of upcoming Web3 NFT projects.
Very interesting. And we're going to stay updated and have a look what's going to happen in this direction.
Yeah, I'm excited. As soon as I can share more and, as soon as we're able to bring something to market, you guys will definitely hear about it. So stay tuned.
Cool. Mohnish, we were doing our best to avoid questions about NFTs, but we couldn't. So the next question, because it's all the rage now, and everyone is interested in, especially when a strategist, let's say, dealing with investment, what's his opinion on the NFT market. But to be more precise, what's your vision of on the future of NFT after this current slowdown, so-called bear market?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think, I personally, this is like just my personal opinion, I think the bear market was the best thing to happen in the space, right? I think if you go back to the 2000s and you look at what happened to with the internet, or if you look at any emerging industry, there's a sort of curve, right? Like it goes, every single person who's heard about it wants to do something in the space without thinking about like, okay, am I building this product? Am I building this community intentionally? They just want to go out there and do something, right? They want to make a cash grab. They want to make a quick impact. They want to make a quick buck. And there were a lot of people like that. I think, we as an industry would be like, we'd be liars kind of to deny that that was what was happening. And I think for the most part, a lot of those projects have died down, right? Because those people just don't see the same sort of cash grab opportunities that they were seeing in the beginning of the year. So I personally think the bear market was the best thing that could have happened. So I'm very bullish on the bear market, if that makes sense. But I think a couple of things that are going to happen going forward, right? I think, if you're going to look at NFTs as just art, then focus on the artist, right? Like focus on the people like people, focus on the people like people pleaser. I think there's a lot of communities out there that use art or use memes to like kind of bring people into like these PFP collections or like 10,000 piece generative collections and then say like, hey, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. I'm not very bullish on those projects. I feel like they're not well-intentioned projects and they're not really building for the things that I'd like to see. So I'm also looking for the projects that are either solely art focused. And if that's what you're doing, if you're an artist and if you're creating art on the chain, I'm all for it. Or if you're not, and if you're a project who's trying to create utility, who's trying to create community, show me that community, right? And show me why you're building for that community or what it is that community wants and how you're going to use the funding that you get from the NFT sales to build that community. So that's kind of the couple of areas that I'm bullish on.
I'm very happy to hear that from you. I believe this is your reply is a gem of today's webinar, as well as the rest of the insights you're sharing with us. Just a quick comment. In my opinion, the NFT market, I could even say it deserved a crisis. I mean, deserved in a good sense, because if we look back in 2009, where May and Moses created their index, All Art Index, for the physical art, they investigated 152 crises and their relation and their influence on the art market. So what the NFT market has been missing, it's the crisis and let's say the understanding of the correlation between the crisis. I mean, what happens with NFTs? So of course, one crisis is not enough, but at least it is something. At least we can see how the dust comes down, and we can distinguish, let's say, good NFTs from, let's say, speculative trades and all that.
Exactly.
These speculative trades, they do not survive the crisis, and that's really good news. So yeah, and also you're quite right that any crisis gives an opportunity. So we have an opportunity to create the community, to establish the trust of the community, of the companies who haven't been afraid of this particular crisis. So yes, I agree with you entirely.
I think we have an interesting question from the audience. Should we bring it up?
Let's do it.
All right. So hi, everyone. Mohnish, about mindfulness in Web3 as a strategist. Can you predict where next generation will invest in more?
Specifically related to mindfulness in Web3, I mean, I feel like, we're already doing that, right? I think if you talk about the promise of a mindful metaverse is essentially a seamless world that can go between the real world and the virtual world, right? And I think if you talk about mindfulness, if you look at things like meditations, if you look at things like breath work, if you look at like visually guided meditations, you should essentially be able to experience those on the go, right? Like if you're in a train or if you're on a subway, you should be able to toggle on and like just feel like you're teleported to like a beautiful mindful space, right? And I think that's kind of the future of the mindful metaverse that we're investing in. Other than that, like it's hard to say where mindfulness in Web3 will go, right? I think one of the things that we definitely want to bring to the space is just an acknowledgement, right? That we need to do more as a community and as a people to bring mindfulness into everything that we do, right? So like one cool example is like if you have, let's say, a series of Twitter spaces that are going on every single day for for weeks or months, maybe one of them should be focused on like mindfulness and how you can be more present, be more calm, and be more aware of your personal mental health, right? So it's small things like that. I don't think a lot of it's like to do with crazy technological advancements. A lot of it's like, okay, as when we were building the social media apps that exist today, the mental health of people or the mental health of participants was never considered, right? And as we bring these new technologies to the mass market, let's make sure that it's something that we think about. Honestly, that's I think the best thing we can do as builders in the space.
Sounds great. Yeah, I just want to highlight, I feel like, about the mindfulness thing, I kind of like mentioned first time and I saw first time like mindfulness is like a separate movement, I know, around 5 years ago. And I kind of understood that I don't know how people lived without it even before, and understand that it's super, super important, especially right now with all the events since like 2020, as you mentioned, with the pandemic and all the upcoming events after that.
Exactly. I mean, I personally come from Indian heritage, and like, mindfulness has been something that's been in our culture for centuries. And it's, it's surprising it's taken this long for the Western world to embrace it. But I think it's a great tool, and I think it's great that we're seeing more people around the globe adopt these practices. So, whatever we can do to support that, I'm all for it.
Absolutely.
Cool. So thanks to the question from our audience, we found out your investors' perspective, what niches in NFT and Web3 sector you consider promising. But from the other hand, what does the ecosystem currently lack? In other words, what niches could be filled with more startups? This is a question that, every startup is interested in, how to find the right market niche. So what's your opinion? Your personal and Galaxy Lab, what does the ecosystem currently lack?
Yeah, I think I alluded to this a little bit in one of my previous responses, but I think we've been seeing a lot of projects that aren't clearly defined in terms of what they are, right? Like I see a lot of these NFT collections and I'm like, I have friends who are texting me about it and they're telling me like the floor price is going 10x and, the Discord is growing 5x and there's some memes that have like 1,000 likes or 10,000 likes. And all of these things are good, but like the thing that a lot of people forget to ask and a lot of the things that people forget to look at is like, why did the founders launch this NFT collection, right? And I think that's really where you need to start, right? I mentioned the idea that if you're an artist or a photographer, then I think, create one of ones, right? Like, have you ever heard of any famous artist? Like imagine Van Gogh coming and saying like, hey, I just released 10,000 paintings today. Like, no, it's not that easy to create a work of art. And if you are an artist, leaving aside the generative collections, which are built using technology, I think we can talk about that a little bit later. But if you're an artist or a photographer, put that one piece out there, right? Just focus on that, put your whole heart and energy into that and launch it and see how people react to it. Like reach out to communities like timepieces, for example, if you're an artist, because they elevate a lot of them. If you're a photographer, the same. If you're building for a community and if you're building a collection, then take a step back, right? So for example, us at Maloka, we have to this date not dropped a collection, right? We have 300,000 plus users. We have, we have massive social following. We have a really good community built in already, but we still haven't dropped our collection. And why is that? Because we don't want the collection to just be something like, okay, I just have a Maloka NFT now, and I'm going to make it my profile picture on Twitter, right? Like, I don't think that's enough. I think that was cool and that was gimmicky and it brought a lot of attention to the space. But we need to start thinking one step beyond, right? Like, okay, after I buy your NFT, like, how am I going to participate in it, right? Mm-hmm. I think the other thing we need to discourage from builders is the idea of just investing in it for profitability, right? I think the future of NFTs and the future of Web3 cannot be solely dependent on people making 10x every single time they buy an NFT, right? We really need to start attracting people that are in it for the community, right? So for example, if you're buying a Maloka NFT, we want you to be there so that you can access more mindful experiences, right? We want you to be there so that you can access in real world meditations or guided yoga camps. We want you to be there so that you can get more content in the game. We want you to be there so that you can connect with other people who are going through a similar journey. We don't want you to be there because you're there to just buy a Maloka NFT and then flip it three months later for 5 times the price, right? Because that's not sustainable. And it's not how you build real projects. So that's kind of my advice to anyone who's looking to enter the space. Like, identify what community you identify with the strongest, right? Like, who are you as a person and what's the community that you identify with the most? What are these people or what is this community of individuals looking for? And then build for them, right? And then once you've got that ethos laid down, then go find an artist that embodies that culture and then drop your collection.
Thank you.
I love your long-term approach to NFTs and how you see that as a community-driven thing. I want to ask you from the investor's perspective, if you look at the project in Web3, what do you look at? Like, what are the core things that you pay attention to?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the things, if I'm looking for profitability, then I'm going to invest only in a couple of things, right? So I'm either going to invest in like artists that I believe in, right? So these could be like, they could be established artists like Bieber or People Pleaser, or they could be up and coming artists, right? Like, it could be a photographer that I really believe in because like, I saw them at some conference, I saw their work online and I see that they're engaging with the right people. they put the right energy and soul into their work, and I believe in their future as an artist, right? Because really, a lot of times when you're buying art, you're really investing in the career of the artist, right? If you look at the price of like a painting, it doesn't vary so much between an artist. Like one Picasso is not going to cost much different from another Picasso. I mean, yes, there might be a range, but it tends to be, like, yeah, I mean, when you're talking at like the higher ranges, it could be, $1 million to 50 million, but it's still like a high value piece of art, right? And so you're really investing in the artist and their work. And so identify those people. Again,
Absolutely.
if you're in it, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, it was just like, I saw Dennis's face when you said that there is like a small difference between one and another one.
And small difference is called provenance, and that could provide several X in value comparison. Okay, so let's get back to the advice from the strategist. Everyone is interested in advice as well as in NFTs. So let's spread the questions into two parts. So first, we'd like to hear the top 3 tips for aspiring Web3 investors today. While saying today, I mean as the expansion of Web3, as the bear market, and as the, let's say, better future. So what would they be?
Yeah, so I think I just mentioned the first one, right? Like, I think investing in artists and in photographers is great. I think identify those people that you think are going to be the next people, right? Or the next people pleaser. It's really hard to identify. It's as good as it's as difficult as picking an Apple or an Amazon stock back in the 2000s. I'm not going to say it's going to be easy, but if you do enough research and if you follow enough people closely enough, you'll be able to identify those people. I think the second thing that you can do is invest in the infrastructure, right? Regardless of which project is going to be successful, all projects are going to have to be built on certain infrastructure, right? Now, I'm particularly bullish on 2 chains, so Ethereum and Polygon. Ethereum primarily, I think, if you look at 90% of the good projects out there, they're all being built on Ethereum. A lot of the games and a lot of the more robust platforms are using Polygon because Polygon actually has a great business development team. They have a great developer resource team, and they actually work very closely with a lot of multinationals and a lot of companies, right? So if you look at like your big Fortune 500 companies, a lot of them are building on Polygon, right? So invest in the infrastructure, right? I think that's an easier bet. I think that's less risky, and it takes a lot of that difficulty of like identifying, for example, the next project or the next artist that's going to be successful out of the equation. And the third thing I would say, and this is not more so for the investors, this is more so for the people who are excited to be in the space and want to be an active member of the Web3 community. Like, find the communities that you like, right? Like, one of the first things I did was like my entire journey into Web3 started back in December. When I was back home in India and I was quarantined essentially for 2 weeks because I got COVID when I reached there, and I was alone in a room with a computer, and I started like joining a lot of these sports and soccer and football related communities, right? And I was just bored, and I was like, okay, I'm already taken off from work, and I don't have that much load right now. Like, let me just mess around. I'm in a room with a computer for 2 weeks. Like, what can I do? And I joined a lot of these communities, and I started learning a lot about like the space overall. I started connecting with people. I started learning about exciting projects, and it was just a great experience, right? Like, and I would highly recommend that to people who are entering the space as well. Just find the communities and projects that interest you and join them, not for profitability, just for the sake of learning and for the sake of fun and for the sake of being there and enjoying the process, right? So yeah, that's kind of my advice to people coming into the space.
And that was like one perspective. And I want to touch another one for the people who are actually the founders, people who are launching the startups. What would be your like recommendations for them? People who are gonna, launch the NFT or art tech startup in the next year or two. What would you recommend?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I've kind of answered this already. I think you got to identify like what it is, who it is that you're building for, right? I think the first thing you need to do is take a step back and be like, okay, who am I as an individual, right? And who am I as, or like, who are we as a founding team? Like, what are the values we care about, right? Like, is it a particular cause, right? Like, do we care about criminal justice reform? Do we care about do we care about supporting supporting animal rights, right? Do we care about supporting environmental rights? Do we care about having fun? It could be anything, right? Like, what is it that you care the most about, and what is it that you can bring people together for, right? Essentially, what you're doing when you sell a collection is you're bringing together 10,000 people or whatever it is. If you sell 5,000, it's 5,000. If you sell more than that, it's that. But you're bringing together people, and you're bringing them together in one single Discord community or Geneva community, right? And you're bringing them together, and you're pooling money together as well, right? Like, in the end, unless you're in it for a cash grab and you say, I'm taking all 100% of the profit, a lot of that money actually sits in a community treasury, right? And it's decided by the community how you're going to spend that money. So if you're going to have a community treasury, like, I mean, if you think about people's lives, right? Like, the only relationship where you have a shared bank account is with like your significant other, right? And you're entering into somewhat of a relationship like that with 10,000 people. So like, think about like what it is that you want to do with these people, right? Like, and with this money together. And if you think about that, and you lay that out in a roadmap where you're like, okay, guys, if we can bring 5,000 people together and raise $1 million, here's what we're going to do with it, right? Lay that out clearly and think through that thoughtfully, and then go out and launch a collection.
Sounds very promising. Sounds like success.
Amazing.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you so much, Mohnish. Also, thank you for taking part in our report, in our survey, and as part of the report in the case study. We'll be happy to showcase Galaxy Labs, in our upcoming Fuel Arts Startups investment report, which is gonna be released soon in 2 weeks. So
I'm excited.
Thank you. Thank you. We're also excited, as well as our audience. So hopefully we'll continue our communication in our LinkedIn groups, and the more questions we have, we'll just send it to you. And everyone wants to be friendly with a strategist. So from now on, the startups from our tech and NFTs society, they know one more strategist who is looking on them, whether they like
Beautiful. It. Well, thank you so much, Dennis. Thanks so much, Sonia. It was a pleasure to be on with you, and thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you. Wish Galaxy Labs success with all of your projects, and Maloka in particular. So I just wanted to add my question regarding the decline in investment in VR in 2021 was a bit provocative, because what the most of the companies who have been previously dealing with VR technologies are now developing the metaverses. So it's quite tricky how to define the pure VR technologies from the metaverse, or in other words, should the metaverse builders should they be considered as let's say visualization companies, according to
I think for sure. I think 100%. I think looking at these technologies in the silo of like VR, XR, AR, I think does not make sense. I think, like I alluded to earlier, I think mass market adoption only happens when a single device has all of that inbuilt, right? Like, you need to be able to be at a Starbucks and try to place an order, and a menu screen pops up, right? And you're like, okay, I want a mocha latte, and then you click pay, and then it shows up to you. And then I should be able to walk over to the train and then click another button, and I should be transported to a world where I can meditate, right? And that requires all of that, right? So I think looking at each of those technologies in silos I don't think does justice to the future that we're trying to build. So, yeah, I think you guys are thinking about it in the right way. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for thinking in one way. So thank you for this inspiring conversation. Good luck and
awesome.
See you soon. Bye, everyone.
Talk soon. Take care. Bye.